names of the original Space Marine legions are often taken for granted within the wider structure of Imperial history, treated as immutable labels granted at the dawn of the Great Crusade. Yet their origins reveal a deeper layer of Imperial culture, propaganda and myth-making that stretches far beyond simple battlefield nomenclature. Understanding where these names came from requires a careful examination of pre-Primarch eras, before each Gene Father reshaped his legion, and the political context in which the Emperor sought to build, not only for a military force, but an ideological foundation for unifying humanity. The legions were never intended to be anonymous armies. They were meant to embody their creator's vision of disciplined strength, heroic mythology, and a symbolic representation of humanity's reclamation of the stars. The Imperial truth discouraged superstition and mythic thinking, yet its institutions quietly harnessed symbolic language with deliberate pursuit. Names were chosen as tools of legitimacy, morale, and structured identity. In the earliest days of the Unification Wars, the Proto-Legions existed in embryonic form as specialized biotechnical projects. These formations did not possess formal names, but instead designations based on numerical coding and internal function. Early Terran records refer to them as bureaucratic phrasing, the third proto-gene cohort, or deployment of the seventh genetic prototype assets. The shift from sterile classification to evocative naming occurred gradually as the Emperor expanded his scope from planetary domination to interstellar conquest. A military machine of unprecedented power needed more than numerical identifiers, it needed mythic resonance. Naming the legions was part of a wider program to foster loyalty throughout symbolic cohesion, ensuring that each legion saw itself as distinct yet intrinsically tied to the Emperor's vision. The names were not originally tied to their lost Primarchs, as the Primarchs were scattered before the Crusade began. Instead, names were imposed by Imperial bureaucrats, iterators, logisticians, and strategic command councils who sought to imprint the legions with a sense of identity that would serve as a stabilizing force during their rapid expansion. Many legion names are best understood as expressions of Terran history, repurposed for a post-apocalyptic era. The Lunar Wolves stand as the clearest example of early Imperial naming logic. Before Horus was found, the 16th Legion was styled as a force of idealized loyalty, guardians of the Emperor's central design. Their association with Terra's lunar sphere symbolized closeness, a reflection of their role as exemplars of the Great Crusade. When Horus reclaimed his legion, the name did not change to reflect his personal history. Instead, the legion adapted the symbolic meaning of the title to represent their Primarch's favored status and proximity to the Emperor himself. The name was later replaced with the Sons of Horus, but the original Lunar Wolves designation highlights how early naming conventions were shaped not by Primarch character, but by Imperial intention. Other legions adopt names that reflected their operational specializations. The Iron Warriors were initially identified less by Perturabo's later obsession with sieges, and more by the strategic emphasis on unyielding force, structured discipline, and attritional warfare. Iron was a Terran linguistic shorthand for endurance, implacability, and martial stability. Their name was selected to imply that they were an unbreakable instrument of conquest, an identity that later hardened into a self-fulfilling prophecy under Perturabo's leadership. The Imperial Fists demonstrated a similar dynamic. Their title originated from a symbolic representation of Imperial authority, the closed fist as a metaphor for resolve and unyielding loyalty. Rogel Dawn's austere nature later aligned him perfectly with their inherited identity, but he did not create it. Instead, he discovered a legion already predisposed towards the disciplined doctrines he himself embodied. For many legions, the origins of their names were tied to cultural memory. The White Scars inherited a title likely inspired by Terran steppe traditions, scars representing martial honor, lineage, and the weathered marks of battle. This tradition fit remarkably well with Jagadai Khan's own cultural heritage, but the synergy was coincidental rather than intentional. When the Emperor's forces discovered Chogoris and its warrior Khanate societies, the match between Legion name and Primarch identity appeared almost providential. Yet in truth, the Imperium had selected the name long before Jagadai was located. The warp scattering of the Primarchs accidentally reinforced matches that would have seemed artificial if designed deliberately. The Blood Angels are another example of symbolic naming tied to Terran mythic structure. Before Sanguinius rejoined them, they bore a reputation for ritualized discipline and a precise, almost artistic combat methodology. Their name was constructed to evoke beauty and lethality simultaneously. Blood represented martial sacrifice and imperial cleansing, whilst angels linked them with the mythic purity of Old Earth's earlier religious iconography, stripped of superstition but retaining symbolic power. When Sanguinius arrived, the name became retroactively sanctified by his angelic appearance, bonding Legion identity with Primarch in a way far more seamless than originally intended. The Emperor's children offer a far more complex example. Their name was not bestowed for symbolic military reasons, but as a political gesture towards the Imperium's elite. The Legion was originally the Third, an experiment in producing a force of absolute perfection. After their near destruction during the Gene Lab disasters of the earlier Crusade, their rebirth under Fulgrim was accompanied by a ceremonial renaming. They became the Emperor's children as a mark of gratitude and favour, the only Legion permitted to bear the Imperial Aquila. The name was thus a direct expression of loyalty rather than a descriptor of their nature. Their later fall makes the name tragically ironic, but its origin lies in bureaucratic diplomacy, not myth. Certain names originated from Terran martial traditions revived during the Unification Wars. Space Wolves, long associated with Fenris and Leman Russ, bore their name before Russ was found. Terran records show that wolves were symbolic of predatory strike warfare, packs, flanks, and relentless pursuit tactics. The early 6th Legion was shaped around shock assaults and brutal close combat efficiency. The name derived from both the tactical metaphor and Terran mythologies that associated wolves with fierce warriors. Russ later adopted and transformed the imagery, turning a symbolic construct into a cultural identity. The same dynamic applies to the Dark Angels, whose name evokes Terran imagery related to hidden strength, clandestine warfare, and the notions of watchers in the shadows. The First Legion's early specialization in compliance operations and clandestine engagements align with these themes long before Lionel Johnson was rediscovered. Other names emerged from broader ideological messaging. The Ultramarines, whose title is sometimes misinterpreted as derived from geographic references, were named to reflect their role as a model legion. Ultra, meaning beyond or superior, was meant to signify their purpose as a standard against which all others could be measured. Their eventual settlement in Ultramar reinforced this association, but the name itself predated Guilliman's arrival and was chosen as part of a propaganda campaign to shape a legion whose reliability could be counted on in any theatre of war. Similarly, the word-bearers adopted a name that reflected their early function as conveyors of imperial ideology. Although later interpretations view the name as foreshadowing their corruption, their initial role was one of ideological compliance, ensuring that humanity embraced the imperial truth with both loyalty and understanding. The Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Night Lords derive from Terran fauna and atmospheric symbolism. These names were chosen to evoke characteristics that Imperial planners sought to associate with each legion. Salamanders were known in Terran legend for endurance through fire, an apt metaphor for a legion specializing in artisan craftsmanship and flame-based weaponry. The Raven Guard were tied to the imagery of stealth and reconnaissance, ravens representing watchers, scouts, and precise strikes. The Night Lords drew from fear-based symbolism, their title intentionally designed to inspire psychological dominance. This was not a reflection of Conrad Kurz, but a further reason why he fits so effectively within the legion that found him. If I can talk in a bit more of a conversational tone for a minute, I think it's worth acknowledging how remarkable these naming coincidences might appear in hindsight. Fans often assume that the Emperor foresaw exactly where each Primarch would land and how their cultures would align perfectly with their legion's names. But really, it's much more likely that the writers built these synergies in reverse. Primarchs and their homeworlds were designed to harmonize with the names that already existed. In lore, this creates a kind of mythic coincidence that makes the setting feel deeper than it probably was intended to be. Dark Angels finding a Primarch raised in a literal dark, monster-haunted forest, White Scars fighting Jaggedite among steppe horse lords, Blood Angels uniting under a literal angelic figure, It all feels strangely predestined, like the Emperor's design was never fully undone by the scattering. Whether that's intentional or simply good narrative retrofitting, the end result is that the legions feel unified in a way that strengthens their mythos, rather than exposing contradictions. And honestly, that's part of why the legions' names continue to feel so iconic. They're simple, evocative, and perfectly matched to the identities their Primarchs eventually forged. The Legion's naming conventions also reflect the Imperium's desire to create psychological archetypes. The Iron Hands and the Death Guard are emblematic of this. The Iron Hands received their names to symbolise unyielding function and relentless technological integration. Before Ferrus Manus was found, the 10th Legion had already adopted machine-focused tendencies, and their name reinforced the dichotomy between flesh and function. For the Death Guard, their name was expressed in utilitarian bluntness. They were to be the guardians of compliance in hazardous war zones, specialising in attrition warfare. The concept of death in their title was meant to represent mortality as a battlefield constant, something they would endure and inflict without hesitation. Mortarion later aligned the Legion with themes of poison, decay and endurance, transforming symbolic naming into a grim cultural foundation. The Thousand Sons represent a unique case. Their name likely emerged from earlier records documenting the instability of their gene seed. The Legion suffered heavy mutation and attrition even before Magnus arrived, and the frequent genetic culling left them dramatically unmanned. Their numbers fluctuated wildly, often reduced to symbolic thresholds. The name may reflect the idea of limited perfection, a small but potent force shaped by arcane intelligence. When Magnus did join them, their title took on a new meaning, becoming a reflection of arcane mastery and esoteric power. Their name also carries echoes of Terran mystic traditions, though the Imperium would never acknowledge such parallels openly. The World Eaters and the Emperor's Children reflect the Imperial need for ideological icons. The World Eaters' name was derived from their Berserk Shock Assault doctrine, intended to convey total destruction against enemy populations resisting compliance. Their title reinforced a narrative of absolute dominance, an identity that Angron later amplified into a form of institutionalized brutality. The Emperor's Children, as mentioned earlier, were named to convey divine favor, and their eventual corruption stands as a dramatic subversion of the original intent. The Alpha Legion stands apart from this entire structure. Their name suggests primacy, Alpha as the beginning, the first cause, or the unseen architect. Whether this was intentional or coincidental is unclear, but the 20th Legion's early role involved covert operations and experimental deployments, meaning their name may have been chosen to evoke strategic superiority. Alfarius later adapted and reinterpreted the title to transform the Legion into a force of distributed identity and secretive purpose. In their case, the Legion name served as a thematic mirror of their Primarch's worldview, rather than a preset identity waiting to be claimed. Collectively, the origins of the Legion's names reveal the Emperor's vision for the Imperium as a symbolic and psychological project. These names were designed before the Primarchs were rediscovered, demonstrating that the Legions were not shaped only by biology, but by narrative construction. The Imperium understood the importance of story, identity, and metaphor. A warrior does not simply fight, a warrior fights as part of something greater, something defined and contextualized. The names of the Legions were crafted to create a sense of unity and purpose across a force assembled from the shattered remnants of old Earth's cultures, societies, and genetic experiments. The arrival of the Primarchs retroactively reshaped their identities, merging pre-existing symbolism with deeply personal history. This fusion between Imperial intention and Primarch interpretation produced the cultural richness that defines each Legion. Without the Primarchs, the names might have remained abstract military designations. With them, the names became legacies that shaped the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and the future of the 41st millennium. In the end, the Legion names are neither arbitrary nor wholly predestined. They emerge from a mixture of bureaucratic design, cultural memory, martial symbolism, and the unforeseen consequences of the Primarch scattering. Their origins underscore the central truth of the Imperium's early centuries, that myth and function are intertwined, and that even in an age of reason, humanity cannot escape its needs for symbols to guide its wars. This archive has now been fully decoded. Continue your journey with the video displayed on screen. The vast wealth of the archives continues to reveal new knowledge of the dark history of the 40k verse. In the grim dark of the far future, there is only war.